Hey everybody, and welcome to another Dorico video. This time we are talking again about the brand new Dorico 6, but we're going to focus in on the improvements they made to chord symbols. This was something that I was really excited when I saw that they had taken care of, because there were a lot of things in Dorico 5 about chord symbols that I frankly just didn't like, and they didn't work real well. And so I really was excited to see that they've added a lot more functionality, a lot more customization, and just the ways of making your chord symbols work a lot better. So here we are with a deep dive into chord symbols in Dorico Pro 6. Okay, so here we are with a version of Blackbird that I've been working on that I'm going to be performing this fall. And I've been working on some chord symbols. Now you can see that this has some pretty non-standard chord symbols, and it's got some pretty elaborate chord symbols as we go through. And one of the things that I was really excited about when I started looking at Dorico was how easily you can enter chord symbols, edit them, change the look of them. Because in Finale, if you opened a file and you say wanted to change the look of your chord symbols, you just about had to delete all your chord symbols and start over or change them manually one at a time, which was a huge pain. But here in Dorico, there are a lot of great settings that allow us to change these right away. And in the new version here in Dorico 6, we have even more controls. Now, those of you who've watched my other chord symbol video or have been using Dorico for a while know that most of these are found under the Engrave menu, which is under Library and Engraving Options. And when you go to the chord symbols, you're met with this gigantic list of options and things that you can change. Now, in my other video, I've gone through most of these, but they did make a couple of small additions that I think are really great. And they did add some features. Most of them, however, are found in other places. But if you haven't taken the time to go through here, I want to point out a couple of really key features that I've started to utilize more and more in my notation. Now, if you're like me and you use things like the MI or MIN for your minor, it's really nice to be able to make those a little bit smaller. But by default, Dorico makes them kind of really small, and I don't want them to be shrunken a ton. I just want to shrink them a little bit. And so I found a couple of really great workarounds to kind of automatically size my chord symbols. And the first one here is you'll notice under many of your chord settings, you have these things for baseline, superscript, and subscript. What this means is baseline is the font that is for the MI or the MA is going to be the exact same font size as the capital letter for the chord symbol. This means that everything will be the same size, and that'll mean the MI or the MA is going to be kind of big because I like the actual root of the chord to be fairly large. So one of the ways of making it smaller is to choose superscript or subscript, but the problem was by default, Dorico would actually make subscript be 60% of the size of your regular font, which was pretty small. But if we go way down to the bottom to design under our chord symbols, you'll see that there's actually a scale factor for sub and superscript contents. And that would allow me to make it only 90%, which is a little bit smaller, which helped a lot. So if you see, if I change this back to the default of 60, you can see that my MIs are really small, and that's not really the way I want my chords to look. So if I go back into my engraving and I bump this back up to 90 again, you can see now they're a little smaller, but they're not stupendously smaller. And so this was a huge game changer for me. And so this is one of the places I really have been working a lot with. You can also see you can up the size of the scale factor of stacked alterations. So if you had, say, like it says here, a sharp 9 flat 5 chord, you can actually make those a little smaller. And again, by default, Dorico has it set to 60, which is pretty small to read those numbers. So this is a way of bumping them up a little bit. There's also some really handy features here about spacing, gaps, and other things. And because now in Dorico 6 we have stacked chord symbols, We also have the spacing for stacked chord symbols here, the distance between, which by default is set at 1 step, which so far I'm using, but we'll see as time goes by. Now remember, all of these settings can be saved as your own default, and then you can recall it when you open a new document by reset to save defaults. Now, if you do a bunch of changes and you think, man, this doesn't look very good anymore, you can always hit reset to factory to put it back to where you had it before. Another great new setting that I found, which I alluded to in the very beginning, is stacked chord symbols. But now in Dorico, when we click on a chord and we open up the chord symbol dialog, you'll see that there's now a little 1 here with a button. And what this is that's the level. So level 1 is the lowest, but if I hit up to level 2, I can now hit a B7 flat 5 chord, for example, and now I have a literal alternate chord that is floating above my original chord symbol because it's in layer 2, and that's what that 2 is for. So again, right now I'm on 1, which is the F7, and 2, which is the B7. Now you might think, well, that's fine, but I can't see anything. Well, Dorico actually also improved that a little bit, which is you'll see the 3 little dots here at the side of our little pop-up menu. This actually allows us to drag the pop-up box out of the way so that we can see the thing that we're working on. And this didn't come up a lot in previous versions of Dorico, but I know for me, once in a while, it would kind of be irritating and it would sort of be like, oh man, I really wish that wasn't there. But now you can actually move it out of your way. And one of the great things about this is it actually remembers. So if I go to this chord symbol here and I hit Shift Q, you'll see that the box is at the same level. So if I move it up once, I don't have to keep moving it out of my way. It actually remembers your preference on that, which is pretty darn impressive. Now, another feature they added, which is on some tools and not others, but specifically on the chords, is you'll see this little person icon here on the end. What this is this allows us to enter a chord symbol into just the part we have selected. So right now I have selected my tenor saxophone part, and let's say I wanted to put an alternate chord here of a D flat 9. And so I could click on this little icon here, and that means when I hit enter, you can see it only put it in the tenor sax part, which meant you don't have to remember that it was option enter on the Mac to get that same feature in Dorico 5. They actually put it where you could find it. And you'll notice that when I select that chord and I go back into the tool under number 2 there, you can see that it tells me that it is a single staff entry. So there's a couple of other new features in the chord symbol that I think are just amazing. The first one is chord symbol selection. Hooray! I don't know if you did this much in Dorico, but in Dorico previously, when we wanted to select a region of chord symbols to copy, we either had to draw a bounding box, which can be kind of complicated, like that, because unless you could see all the chords at once, it was kind of a pain, or we had to select all the measures using the system track, highlight them, and then I had created a hotkey for this, but under the filters, we could select chord symbols, which again was kind of a pain. So I had to do all of these steps just to copy my chord symbols. But now Dorico gave us some amazing new tools. You can select a chord symbol, hold down Shift, and then click a ways down the document, and it'll grab all the chord symbols in between. I can show this really easily in a part. If I click on the first chord symbol here, hold down Shift, and click on the last one, you can see it selected every single chord symbol from the beginning to the end, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I can also hold down Control or Command on the Mac, and you can see I can select them individually, but I can also now use the Select More command, which is if you hold down Shift Command A on the Mac, you can see it will select the rest of the measure, and then the rest of the line, and then the rest of the document. So that would be 3 clicks on the same command. This, to me, is just a game changer. I cannot stress to you how much this is a relief. They also, once again, gave us two more additive things, which again are so great. I can select a region of, like, say, my rhythm section, and let's say I wanted to copy this to a new section of my composition. So I'm going to grab 2 bars here, and it's easy enough to grab all of the notes, the rests, and the dynamics this way. But previously it was really hard to bring the chords with it. But now there's a new keyboard command. And the way I'm going to show you how to get there is using the jump menu, or the J key. Now you could set a shortcut for this, which I will soon. But if I hit J, you can see I've been using this a lot recently. There's a new command, which is add chord symbols to selection. And guess what? Now I can copy both the chords and the notes all at the same time, and just these rhythm section parts. So when I paste them, it brings the chord symbols and just the selected notes I wanted, which is just, again, a huge time saver for those of us who make like big band charts where I want to copy the guitar part down the line and I want to bring the chord symbols with me. Now, they also gave us another option here, which now that you can see, if I select all of this region here, and if I go into the jump menu, I can hit select chord symbols, and now voila, it'll just select the chord symbols, so I could copy just the chords instead of the chords and the notes. And now it's dependent on what I select with my mouse in the music rather than having to use the system track. Now the system track does work, but it was just a lot of mouse clicks and a lot of menus to go through the filter option. So this was just a big time saver. It really sped up the process. So I am so happy that they added this. And please, like I said, leave a comment on the bottom. This to me was a huge game changer, and I hope you feel the same way. They've given us a couple more really great options for making our chord symbols look the way we want to. Now, if you watch some of the official Dorico videos, they're going to talk to you about the order in which to do these kind of edits. And I do want to highly recommend that you think about going to the Engrave option first and foremost anytime you want to change something in your chords to make them look right. Because that's an easy one to change back and forth and test, whereas some of these other options are a little more kind of strict and they're harder to fix if you mess something up. So again, I always go to Engrave first. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is you can see that I use a different font for my actual chord symbols and for the text part. I really don't like some of the other fonts that come with Dorico and some of the ones that were in Finale. I think they look a little funny and they're just not quite as legible as I'd like. So one of the things I do is I go under Library and I go to the font styles and I come in here and I'll change my default music text font, which this one is an important one because this is the one where it's going to draw things like the flat and the sharp in the name of a like B flat trumpet part, for example. And then also we have these chord symbol ones, and you can see that I actually am using the Brava font for my chord symbols, flats and sharps, and that's because some of the notations that exist in our fonts are really kind of oversized in some of the other fonts. A lot of times I was trying to use my Groove font, which I really like for the actual music itself, but unfortunately the slash associated with Groove for these chords is too big. The other thing that you'll find is that in a lot of these fonts, you'll see that there's Groove text, and then there's also just one called Groove. And the one called Groove, you can see that that slash is just oversized, huge. I really didn't like it. It wasn't working for me, which is why I went back to using the Brava font, because the Brava font has a much smaller size and it allows the music to get a lot closer. Now, it does make the sharp and the flat not quite as handwritten looking, but I think that's a good trade-off for me because I want my chord symbols to be a little tighter. Now, this is where Dorico in 6 added a really awesome feature. So once you've gone into your library in your font styles and you've chosen your chord symbol font, which this is the font that I have chosen for my text, and you can see that I'm using this Charter one, and this is derived from my default text font that I chose for my whole document. A lot of you are probably using Pentaluma, which comes with Dorico, but this is the one I chose. And then I changed the chord symbol music text font. This is the flats, the sharps, and all that stuff. You can see that I did up the size a little bit from the default. I think they were too small, so I made them a little bit bigger. But once I've done that, I can go in and I can look at my chords and I can think to myself, man, some of these chords are kind of spread out weird. For example, this G add 2. Look at all that space around the A there. I'm going to zoom way in here. So look at how much space there is between the parenthesis and the A. And this is where Dorico Pro 6 added a feature called Chord Symbol Kerning Pairs. Now, kerning, if you're not familiar with font lingo, is the distance between objects in a font. And so the kerning size is the distance between the A and the D in a word like sad. Now, all fonts are built with a certain amount of kerning, but what happens in this chord symbol thing is because Dorico is mixing the text font with the music text font, some of these spaces don't quite work right. Now, you can see in my list here, I have Academico, which is the default chord symbol font for Dorico when you're using kind of the classical music, not the handwritten font, and Brava, which is its default for like sharps and flats, that kind of thing. And then you can see here is my Charter Bold Italic, which is the chord symbol font I am using in this document, and Brava, which is the one I'm using for my sharps and my flats. And so if I was to highlight this pairing, and then I'd start typing in this chord symbol, G add 2, you can see it pops up with my chord symbol. And then you can see if I select a piece of the chord symbol, you can see this number here, this 0.283. That's the literal distance between this piece of the chord and this piece of the chord. So if I either mouse drag this over or use this input box to change it up and down, you can see I can push these objects closer together. Now the blue outline, both the shaded version and the blue text when highlighted, that represents the literal space of that object in the font. So if I grab this and I pull it over, you can see I can crush this together a little bit to save a little bit of white space. And so now, if I hit OK, you're going to see how it pulled the word add closer in. That looks pretty good, but maybe I want it to be just a little bit tighter. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to type in my chord symbol again. And you can see that I can pull it a little bit closer. And now look at that. And that saves a lot of white space on the page. Another one that I changed a lot in here is I changed the spacing between the slash chord and this A9/G. Now this one, because this sort of chord symbol is more readily available, I can go in and I can start typing A9, and then I put in my /G. And you can see what I can do here is I can change the interval, as they call it, and then I can pull this in so it's a little bit closer. And what's going to happen is on all chords with a 6, a 7, a major 7, a 9, a major 9, and 11, it pulled it closer. So it's actually changing this on all of these different ones. So in one fell swoop, I went in and I changed all of these slash chords because I was changing that interval. So let me show you that again. So if I go to that A9 over G, what this is saying is this marking, this over or the slash, that is not unique to just this one chord. It's a part of a lot of different chords. And so these buttons up here where it changes root, see, I can make this an A sharp or a B flat. I can try B, and I can actually go in and I can change all of these different settings at once. So like if I want to alter the quality of the chord, say I want a minor 9, you can see I can scroll through and I can see the kerning. And so I have a whole bunch of different options when it comes to these sort of spacings and these changes I can do. So you can see in this kerning option, I actually have the ability to change a whole bunch of different options all at once. And so when I go in here, maybe I have an A9 here, but maybe I have an A7 later in the chart. So I could go to A7, and now I can change the slash for that chord as well. I can also go in, and if I simplify the chord to say A7, you can see I can scroll through and I could change the distance that the 7 has between the MI and the diminished symbol. And here I could change the flat 5 to pull it a little bit closer. Now this is a little time consuming, but what I find is on a specific document, I just find that I have one chord symbol I used a bunch, like this G add 2, and I just wanted to crush it together a little bit. And so I'm using the kerning option to just fix that one chord symbol, which made it work for this whole document. It is true that under that, you can use this star here to save this as a default. So for all future documents, it would actually pull this setting in for me. I don't know if I want that yet, so I'm not going to save it as a default, but do note that you can do that. You can also get to this setting if you're in the Engrave option. So now by default in Dorico, if I double click on a chord in the Engrave option, you'll see that it brings us to this kerning pairs, and it allows us to make these changes right here. So this is a way of, in the Engrave options, if you want to kind of, oh, this D9 sus doesn't look quite right, I can go in and change it here, and it's actually a universal change, and it'll change it for all the sus9 chords in the document. So it's a way of just kind of speeding this up a little bit so that I can grab these parts, and it'll change it not just for this one chord, but all the chords like it. And so I'm actually making these changes a little bit more universally, whereas if I went from the right menu and I just went in there, I'd have to type in every chord I wanted to change. Now, Dorico added one other huge feature, which honestly I haven't had to use yet, but I did use this a lot in Finale, which is you can define your own custom chord symbol. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go under Library and Chord Symbols. And then we're going to type in the chord symbol that we want to add to the library. So in this case, I'm going to add a sharp 4 flat 2, which I'm not sure I've ever seen this chord, but that's what I want. And when I hit the plus sign, you'll see it says Dorico does not recognize the chord symbol you have added. Click OK to add a new custom chord type. So I would hit OK. Then you're met with this new window. Now the name and the popover text have to do with how you're going to find the chord. The name can be a little more descriptive, but the popover text is the one that you're actually going to type into the computer. So when you type the root, then I would have to do parenthesis sharp 4 flat 2. Now I could, in this case, get rid of the parentheses in the popover, so I wouldn't actually have to type that, but I'm going to leave it in my name. Now below here, you're going to see the options to add in the chord symbol intervals. And what this does is it allows the computer to automatically play back the chord symbol if you enable that in the play menu. So here I'm just going to make a basic voicing for the chord by clicking on the first note, which will be identified as the root with a red dot, and then every subsequent note is going to be the interval above the root. So I'm going to put in the third, which is a major 10th, because in this case it's a major chord. Then I'm going to add the sharp 4, and then above that I will add the flat 2. So this is the voicing I want to have played, and you can hear it here in the keyboard playback. Pretty crunchy, but I want something a little dissonant in this piece. So there you go. now I have defined my chord. I have the popover text to type, I have the name, and then I have all of the information. And when I hit OK, you'll see it has added it to my chord list. And you'll see it has all roots, meaning it can change any root of the chord, and then it has the chord symbol itself. And the name, you can see it added in the parentheses and everything, because that's how I defined it. Now, if I hit OK, you can see I can go ahead and highlight a note, and I can enter in this chord, C, sharp 4, flat 2. Now, the problem is it didn't use a flat symbol or a sharp symbol, and it's kind of weird because I'd probably like these intervals to be stacked. So this is where I can go in and I can actually edit the chord symbol itself and change its appearance. So if I go back under chord symbols under library, and I click on that, I can then go here, highlight this chunk of the chord, and hit the pencil to change it. Now, because when Dorico created the chord, it just created that whole entire piece as one big chunk, we have to sort of get rid of it, because what we don't want is we don't want to use text font for everything. We want to build this from different pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is just hit the delete key, this trash can here, and it gets rid of all of that stuff. Now, the first thing I need for my chord symbol is to add in a bracket. And because I want this to be a tall bracket, because I'm going to stack my intervals on top of each other, under the glyph menu and under range, I want to use these chord symbols ones, because what these are is these are the big brackets used for like the double high chord symbols. And we have the thin one and the thick one. And so I'm going to use the thin one. So I will highlight it and hit add glyph. And you can see now it added my nice big Brava glyph there. And see, I can zoom out a little bit so I can see a little bit more of my working space. And so now I have the great big double high parenthesis for my chord. Now the next thing I need to add is the sharp 4. Now, when I first started experimenting with this, the first thing I did is I went under my glyphs and I added a flat, and then I went and I found my 4. But it turns out Dorico actually was nice, and they pre-made these things for you. So under composite, you can see here under chord symbols, there's a whole bunch of different things that you might use in a chord symbol. Sharp 5s, flat 5s, all of these things. And so because I'm doing a 4 first, I'm going to enter the 4, and lo and behold, look at it there. There's sharp 4 right there in my list. And there's a couple of different ones. You can see here's a small sharp 4 and a big sharp 4. So I'm going to choose the small sharp 4. Here's another version as well. And I'm going to hit add composite. And now you can see it just adds it right there to my document. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag it up because I want it to be high up above the flat 2. Now it's important that you have chosen the right category here, because if you chose figured bass or something like that, it's going to pull from the wrong category set. Now the next piece I need is my flat 2. So again, in my search bar, I'm going to put in a 2. And again, it'll give me my flats and my sharps. And so I have big flat 2 and little flat 2. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the little flat 2 to go with my other one. And this time I'm going to go ahead and pull it down and put it underneath the 4. And I can adjust the spacing and make things kind of look the way I want it. But you can see when I grab the 2, it's independent. But the nice thing is, see, if I grab the 4, it brings both of them with it. And that's a really cool feature, because if you get the 2 and the 4 looking good, but you realize they're too far away from the parenthesis, if you grab the upper one, it'll actually bring both of it with them, which is just, again, amazing. So you go under glyph again, and now I'm going to choose my ending parenthesis, and I'll put it in. And now you can see that up here at the top, that ending parenthesis is ramming into my 4, so I'm going to drag it over a little bit. And maybe I want to just go ahead and grab all of this mess and pull it down a little bit. So I'm just going to lower everything down so I can see the top of my bracket there. There we go. Now I have a chord symbol that looks pretty good. Now you might think to yourself, man, the 4 looks a little large, so maybe I'll scale that back to say 85%, and I'll click on the 2 and I'll scale it back to 85%. And again, I can bring the 2 over and adjust it, and then I'm going to grab my parenthesis and close that off. And now everything fits much nicer inside of it. And when I hit OK, you'll see it has converted that big mass of unusable text into something that is actually more notation based rather than text based. And if I hit OK, you'll see it auto updates my chord symbol. Now you can see that the kerning there is a little bit off because you can see it's smashing into my chord root. So if I go back under my chord symbols, I can go back to this custom chord and I can drag this piece in this menu here and see I can pull it over a little bit. And you can see it will preserve that spacing I did as I go through my different roots. If I put this back to a 0 offset, you can see it's crushed up against there. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that again. Whoops. I added it 0.6. And maybe I want to lift it up a little bit. So I'm going to put that under 0.2. And then maybe I want to make it just a little bit smaller. So I'm going to set this to 60%. And then I'm going to raise it up just a little bit more. And then hit OK. And now you can see it's starting to look the way I want it. And I can just keep going back and forth here. And I can keep changing this chord symbol to my heart's content to make it look the way I want and really display perfectly. Now, I know this is a little bit time consuming, but the nice thing is, if I was to go in here under chord symbol and I was to click on this and save it as a default, guess what? It will now show up in all my new documents as well. So we can actually make this a chord symbol default in all of my Dorico, which is great. If you want to change the playback intervals, you can go into this pencil, not this one, but this one down here, and this will bring you back to this screen where you can make some of those changes. So in closing, there are some really great new features here in Dorico Pro 6 having to do with chord symbols. I'm really excited to dive in even deeper. But remember, we have a few new options under Engrave, which is always where we should go when we want to change the sizes of things, how things are displayed. Then we have the chord symbol kerning, which again, the shortcut to kern a specific chord is to go under Engrave, double click on that chord, and by default, it'll now bring you to the kerning option where you can change the horizontal spacing of things. And the reason that you can't change the vertical spacing is because that's defined by the superscript and the subscript in your Engrave options. Thanks so much for watching. Again, if you're liking these videos, please subscribe to the channel. I'm getting really close to 10,000 subscribers, and I'm looking forward to flipping over to that 5-digit number. Also, if you haven't checked out any of my music, please visit my website, larsonjazz.com. And as always, if you're looking for some help, please feel free to reach out. I do custom Zoom classes on Dorico and other things, so if you're looking for some help, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.